You're here? Otherwise, I would have prepared this for nothing.
It's never for nothing.
A lot of this is stuff that I, just generally knew anyway, but I did do a little bit of extra research to be able to fill in some of the blanks. So today what I wanted to talk about was really what is the biggest issue within Israeli society besides the war and conflict. Because the war and conflict, everyone pretty much agrees in Israel that after October 7th, the world changed, and you need to fight your enemies in new ways. Although this war with Iran was inevitable going back almost 30 years. I mean, everyone knew eventually it was going to happen and that Iran was going to try to acquire nuclear weapons. It wasn't like Iraq where you had to guess, maybe, are they thinking about it, are they trying? They told you. They brag about it all the time. Not only that, in their main square in Tehran, they had a countdown clock to the destruction of Israel. Literally had a clock. They open all of their sessions of parliament with death to America and death to Israel. We say, take your seats, how you doing, what's new? They say, hey, how's it going? Death to Israel. Right? I mean, that's their motto of their government. What a lot of Americans don't seem to understand is the nuclear weapons in Iran were not to destroy Israel. October 7th was the way to destroy Israel, by surrounding Israel with a ring of proxy fire terrorists and to strangle Israel with conventional missiles. You don't need nuclear weapons to destroy Israel. And if you did, you would also kill 2 million Muslims. Actually more. You'd kill quite a few more. And you'd destroy the holy places, which is not their goal. The goal of the nuclear weapons is twofold. One is, Israel, why they needed nuclear weapons was always an excuse. Because Israel had nuclear weapons, we need to have nuclear weapons. But Israel, what interest does Israel have in conquering Iran? I mean, for what? We're going to go settle it? We don't even have enough people. We barely settle Boca. How are we going to settle, Iran has 90 million people. Well, what Jew do you know is dying to go live in Tehran? The only Jews I know who are dying to go live in Tehran work for the Mossad. All right, I'll be here. They killed all the leaders of the Iranian regime. So the next meeting, they had the only leaders who were left of the regime, and they all looked at each other and realized they all worked for the Mossad. They were the only ones who were left.
And they didn't want the job.
Yeah. So why am I still here? Oh, you too? You too? I didn't realize this whole time. You too were with the Mossad. Okay. So the nuclear weapons, Israel was the excuse. They wanted to destroy Israel, but not with nuclear weapons, with conventional weapons, with Hezbollah, with Hamas, with the Houthis, with Syria, with all sorts of proxies. The nuclear weapons were for two reasons. One, because Iran wants to be the most dominant power in the Muslim world. And you can't be the most dominant power in the Muslim world if Pakistan has nuclear weapons and you don't. So in order to keep up with Pakistan, they needed nuclear weapons. But two, unlike Pakistan, who is afraid of India, or North Korea, as crazy as they are, haven't used them, Iran actually was building them for the purpose of using them proactively. Not for Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. That was never the goal. The goal of those nuclear weapons is London and Paris. Well, before London became a Muslim city. But Miami, Boston, D.C., New York. That's the goal of the nuclear weapons. They felt they could defeat Israel with their proxies, but they knew they couldn't defeat the West without the nuclear weapons. So for all these Americans who are saying, what do we care? That was the point. You wanted a dirty bomb on the subways? Well, now that New York's in Muslim control, you don't have to worry about that. It's not... There's a lot of material. There's a lot of material. You know, it's like the comedians, the only people who want Trump to have a third term are the comedians because there's so much material. But with Mamdani as well, you have a lot of material. Okay. So everyone agrees on that. But Israeli society, if you remember, I know a guy who did it, he gave a three-part course. It was called Israel on October 6th was the first lecture, Israel on October 7th was the second lecture, and Israel on October 8th was the third lecture. Has there ever been a country that had been completely different on 3 separate days more than those 3 days? I mean, it's crazy. I mean, maybe there were, but, you know, either before Pearl Harbor, okay, whatever, but before 9/11. But Israeli society was totally divided on October 6th. So the question is why? What was the problem on October 6th? And the answer was judicial reform, if you remember. But judicial reform, I mean, the people understand it in Israel. And they understood that maybe the court had too much power. And depending on where you were in society, that determined how you felt about the Supreme Court. But the people who really hated the Supreme Court were the settlers. The settlers who lived in the West Bank hated the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court had the power to decide where you live is illegal. And every once in a while, they would come in and remove people from where they were living. But after 2005, that was the end of any kind of relationship that could exist between the settlers and the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court permitted Ariel Sharon, who was prime minister at the time, to disengage. It was called the program of Hitnatkut, which means to disengage and unilaterally withdraw from Gaza, which is fine if you're talking just military terms, but this meant evicting thousands of Israelis from their homes in the Gaza Strip in the settlements where they lived, and the Supreme Court allowed it to happen. And from that point forward, you had different types of... Now, you also had the majority of the Supreme Court in the history of the Supreme Court was Ashkenazic elite. And that meant the Sephardic poorer classes who primarily vote for Likud took Bibi's side and were against the Supreme Court. So Israel was divided on the stance of how you felt with regard to judicial reform, but people didn't necessarily feel, I mean, if a president was going to pack the court and go from, 7 judges to, or whatever, 9 judges to 12 judges, or 13, or whatever it was, I don't think America would be so divided over it. I think you could go down to Lincoln Road right now, or any place in Miami, go to a Heat game, and just ask people around, listen, what's your stance on packing the court? They would think you're talking about packing a gun. They won't even know what the hell you were talking about. I barely understand it. Okay, so maybe, and even if they do understand it, well, look, if you're in the good seats in Miami, they're all lawyers, so they do understand it. But go a little higher up, beyond where the Beth Am members sit, to the top, and ask people. Some of this is good material, guys. But you ask people. But in Israel, everyone was divided over it. But it's not because they were divided over that issue. It's because they were divided over, yeah, but I'm Sephardic. And this is the tradition that we come from. We never liked the Supreme Court, and if Bibi says they're bad, they're bad. Yeah, but I'm Ashkenazic, and I don't like anything that Bibi likes, so he must be an autocrat trying to take over the whole government. And I don't know, there may be truth on both sides, I don't know. But this is how people felt. And so not only did you see a division on what people felt about the judicial system, you saw a widening of the division between Ashkenazic and Sephardic, and you saw a widening of the divisions between settler and those who live in the main parts of Israel, which you would call on the other side of the Green Line. And you also saw a widening of Orthodox versus secular, because the Orthodox are more radical generally on the settlements. Not always, but often. And that's where Israel was on October 6th. Comes October 7th, and everyone forgets about that. They're starting to remember now, by the way. And you're seeing these cracks again. But the main crack, even though that crack remains in Israeli society, it took on a whole new definition. And this is the difference between, and this is what I want to talk about today, the Orthodox in Israel. Because the Haredim, now Haredi means ultra-Orthodox. What's the difference between ultra-Orthodox and modern Orthodox? Anybody know? Okay. Okay, so garb. Ultra-Orthodox means that you completely shut out the non-Orthodox world. You don't watch TV. You have kosher phones. Kosher phones. There's such a thing. Kosher phones is a phone that you can only get certain applications on. It blocks all the websites you shouldn't be looking at. You don't read normal newspapers. You read your own newspapers. Your kids only go to ultra-Orthodox schools. And then after that, they go to yeshiva and they study Torah forever, and you set them up in an arranged marriage with someone else, and you're a totally closed society. That's ultra-Orthodox. Modern Orthodox is, I'm Orthodox. I live according to Jewish law. But I could be a doctor. I could be a professional bowler. I don't know about that, because they probably bowl on Shabbos. Like in the movie The Big Lebowski, he doesn't roll on Shabbos. I just put that together just now. I didn't prepare that joke. You could be a dentist. You could, have you ever been to Dr. Sandman? No? Anyone know him? Yeah. Yeah, everyone knows him. Well, a lot of men know him. He's a urologist at a Baptist hospital. He's Orthodox. So,
Where does Chabad fall?
Okay. Chabad is a hybrid. Chabad is a hybrid. And that's because of the Rabbi. And that's why Chabad is so big. Chabad is not one of the largest Orthodox movements, but it's the most famous. Because all the other ultra-Orthodox movements don't want to have anything to do with us. But the Rebbe said, no, we want to bring every Jew in. The other ultra-Orthodox movements said, these goyim, I don't have anything to do with it. But Chabad said, no, bring every Jew in. And because of that, he sent his emissaries out to every single place on the planet. They're already looking at property in Tehran. So if you want to donate to Chabad of Tehran, they're already sending Rabbi Mendel out there to take over. So, there's Chabad of the Moon, and the Chabad of Timbuktu, and Chabad of, wherever there is, wherever two Jews there, there's Chabad. So they're a hybrid. And they're Zionist, which is not always the case with ultra-Orthodox, which I'll explain that as well. But a modern Orthodox person is someone who keeps kosher, keeps Shabbat, doesn't drive on Shabbos, learns Torah, goes to shul, but we'll read Time magazine, we'll watch 60 Minutes, we'll watch a Heat game, we'll go to a Heat game, we'll send his kids to Yeshiva University, but maybe also send them to Yale or Harvard or where. They live in the world, and they're interested in, they'll read books that have nothing to do with Judaism. Ultra-Orthodox, that's not a thing. There's no such thing. It's totally closed. So, in Hebrew, those ultra-Orthodox are known as Haredim. Okay? Now,
What percentage are they
about 25, 30% of Israelis.
of Israel?
Yeah, maybe less, maybe 20. Orthodox is more. Haredim maybe 18 to 20, I think 30 overall when you count the religious Zionists. But it's growing because they have 27 kids each, so which we'll talk about. Now, the biggest issue before October 6th with the Haredim was they don't work. They live on a completely welfare-based system. And the rest of Israel was saying, we're paying for you. You hate us. You call us goyim. You look at us like we don't belong here. And we pay your bills. Now, they live in squalor. They're happy to live in squalor. They don't mind. I've been to some of their apartments. I've seen, it's disgusting the way they live. The food they eat, the whole thing is gross. It is really a poverty lifestyle. But they don't mind that because it allows them to live the way they live, and they're happy, and they all live together, and they have everything they need. But they don't work. They just study Torah. Which studying Torah is good. Now, why is this legal? How is it? Israel has mandatory draft. And they say, draft me. I'd rather sit in jail. So Israel says, we don't need you in our jails. You go study Torah. Now, why did this happen? This happened, whose fault is this? Ben-Gurion. Don't cheat and look at... All right, but this is Ben-Gurion's fault. Now, it's not Ben-Gurion's fault because he never imagined that this would happen. He imagined a lot of other things. They told him no one would ever live in the Negev. A lot of people, he got a lot right. But you have to understand, here's what happened. 1948, Israel's founded. The rabbis come to him and say, we have 400 yeshiva students. Every great rabbi in the world, with the exception of a few, and the entire industry of Torah study was just annihilated in the Holocaust. We just lost it all. We lost all the scholars. We lost all the geniuses. We lost the whole communities. We're not going to have Torah going forward if we don't put a priority on it. What was Ben-Gurion's response? He wrote a letter. And this is what led to what we have today. Because at the time you had 400 yeshiva students, now you have hundreds of thousands of them. So here's the letter. I brought you the letter. This is what Ben-Gurion wrote in 1963. Dear Eshkol, Eshkol's Levi Eshkol, who at the time was the prime minister. He said, I'm not of the opinion that you need my advice in government. So Ben-Gurion's retired, but still running the country. He's still the godfather. But Levi Eshkol was the prime minister. So I'm not of the opinion that you need my advice in government matters, and it's not my intention to lend such advice. However, the rioting by religious fanatics exceeds all limits, and I feel that I bear responsibility to some degree. I exempted yeshiva students from doing military service. Indeed, I did so when their numbers were small, but they have been steadily increasing, and their lawlessness constitutes a danger to the state's honor. We do not need to appear in the world as think where we were in 1963. So he says, I don't want to be Alabama or Johannesburg, right, or Pretoria. I propose that every yeshiva student of age 18 and over who is apprehended at an illegal gathering, throwing rocks, attacking citizens, or other acts of violence and hooligans should be recruited immediately into the IDF to serve like any other young Israeli for the term of 30 months, etc. Generally, the entire question of yeshiva students should be examined and whether they should be exempt from military obligation. Certainly lawbreakers, etc. Now, in 1958, he wrote a letter that said, yes, why do you say this is my fault now? Because in 1958, 1948, but I think it became law by 1958, that they don't have to go to the army. Okay, so the yeshiva students are now not going to the army. But what happened by 1963? Their numbers had grown so much that they're an actual voting bloc now. And they have their own representation in the Knesset. And it's not as easy to ignore them. Okay. So, up until October 6th, the main issue in Israel was that economically, we're taking care of you. Comes October 7th, and after October 7th, something happened that no one in Israel ever imagined could happen. And that's a war that lasted more than a couple of weeks. Israel fights short wars. Israel can't afford to fight long wars. Because who's going to work? How are we going to pay for it? Who's going to fight? We don't have enough soldiers. And with all of those questions that Israel never wanted, they figured it out, and they did it, and they fought a war for 2 years. And the entire conversation shifted. From here, now say I'm someone who lives in Tel Aviv. I send my son to go fight. He goes to fight. I myself have to go to reserves. Say I'm a little young. Well, actually, people in their 50s are going to reserves too. So I go to the reserves for 3 months. Who's watching my store? Or who's teaching my classes? Nobody. So I'm just losing money. So I go to, the government will give me, I don't know, say I make 10,000 shekels a month. The government will give me 3,000. So I'm losing a lot of money. A lot of people are closing stores, closing restaurants, whatever. So I go to fight. I go for 3 months. I'm 50 years old. I can barely, I have sciatica. I can barely walk across. I go fight for 3 months. I come back. I'm home for a week. Phone rings. We need you for another 3 months. Okay, I go do another 3 months. Hopefully I come back alive. Not all my friends will. I come back. Meanwhile, now I'm going for my third session of reserves. And it's not to just sit behind a computer. It's to go into Gaza and get shot at and try not to get killed. Now I come back, and I look across the street, and the Haredi guy, the whole time I've been over there, studying Torah, as if the war is not even going on. And Israel, the generals are saying, we don't have enough soldiers to do this. But 20% of our population won't lift a finger to help us. And so what happened was the crack in society went from economic to military. And what's become pretty much the biggest issue right now in Israel, if there was going to be an election today, is what is Naftali Bennett running on? I'll draft the Orthodox tomorrow. Which isn't so easy, because they would rather go to jail than go fight.
Actually, they said they would rather die.
Yeah. So, now, what's the precedent for this? How many of you are familiar with Psalm 133? Everyone. Every Jew you've ever met knows Psalm 123. It goes like this. Hine ma tovu mana. See, you didn't think you knew it. All right, now. Hine ma tovu manayim. How good it is to sit together. Shevet achim gam yachad. To sit or dwell together as brothers and sisters. Well, in Reform we had the sisters. But Shevet Achim means brothers sitting together. What does that mean for brothers and sisters to dwell together? What does it mean? Of course brothers and sisters dwell together. Why do we need a psalm to tell us that? So there was a rabbi named the Malbim who explained, he lived in the 19th century. Look what he says it means. If you look at this is the Malbim on the first verse of Psalm 133. Behold how good, so this is the verse, right? Behold how good and how pleasant it is that brothers and sisters dwell together, right? That's the Hine Matovu Manayim. So what does he say that mean? This song was founded upon the two well-known brothers, Yisachar and Zvulun, who joined together until they were like one body and one soul. So you remember the 12 tribes? Remember Jacob had 12 sons? 2 of them were Zvulun and Yisachar. Now, who wrote this psalm? According to tradition, King David. So he's writing this psalm, and he's saying, it used to be, when the Jews first came to Israel, each tribe was allotted a different place to live. And Yisachar and Zvulun were 2 brothers, and they made a deal with each other. This was the deal. Yisachar engaged in Torah and wisdom, while Zvulun engaged in commerce to support him. Therefore it says, how good? Because the true good is the spiritual and eternal good, which is the Torah study of Yisachar. And how pleasant? because pleasantness refers to the benefits of the world which come through the livelihood provided by Zvulun. When brothers and sisters dwell together, one studying Torah and the other supporting him, both the good and the pleasant are fulfilled together. So they had a deal. Zvulun said to Yisachar, listen, there's a mitzvah to study Torah. We don't love that one. Well, who needs it? You guys study for both of us. But we're hunters. So we'll send you over some food. And we'll pay the bills. You do the studying. We'll call it a deal. And who loves this more than anyone? Reformed Jews. Hine matov. Right. That's the one thing we know. That's all we say. Hine matov. So whenever I walk into a Reformed shul and I hear people singing Hine matov umana, I go and say, I didn't know you were so political. Huh? That's rabbinic humor. Okay. So here you have a precedent from King David, the prophet, who said, sure, someone's got to study Torah on behalf of all of the Jewish people. And David Ben-Gurion agreed. David Ben-Gurion says, you got 400 students, be my guest. I could live with that 400 students. But now it's hundreds of thousands. And now they're a massive drain on the economy. At the same time, we don't have enough soldiers to replace the reserves. That's the break. Okay, now, not all Orthodox in Israel are ultra-Orthodox. There are a couple other groups. One is the modern Orthodox, which could live anywhere in Israel. So, it's interesting. If you're at the, if you're walking around the bus station, or, you could very well see some guy in shorts and a t-shirt wearing a kippah. He could be dressed like anyone from anywhere in the world, but he's wearing a kippah. In Israel, that means you're Orthodox. You don't wear a kippah if you're not Orthodox, unless you're a visiting Reform rabbi. Otherwise, there's no such thing. Now, all of the ultra-Orthodox, they wear the big black hats, but underneath the hat, they have a black kippah. Why black? Because they're in mourning for the destruction of the temple. And that has always been the custom. But the religious, a new class of Orthodox arose in Israel called the Dati Le'umi, which means the religious nationalists. And they wear kippahs like this, what's called kippah sruga, knit yarmulkes. And if you go to Ben Yehuda Street and you go to the store called the Kippah Man, you can get this yarmulke in any size, in like 4 million different designs. This is a 4. I used to wear a 5. But I used to wear a 5. But as I started losing hair, like the bigger yarmulke called too much attention to that area. So I saw Naftali Bennett, who's totally bald. He wears a really little yarmulke. I said, maybe I'll go to a 4. So I went to a 4. It's a different look. All right. There was a rabbi at a very famous yeshiva who said, why should we all wear the same kippah? We each have our own unique soul. You should pick a kippah that you think fits your eye, that you like. And ever since then, this was probably in the 70s, the modern Orthodox and the religious Zionists, which I'll explain what that is in a minute, started wearing this type of yarmulke. And in Israel, you can tell someone who they're affiliated with by what type of yarmulke they're wearing. Some of them have like the big kaftan thing, and that's probably Sephardic. Ethiopians have a certain thing. It's not hard to figure out who the Ethiopians are. But different yarmulkes mean something. So when I was in Israel, you've probably heard me tell this story, but when I was in Israel before the war started, before October 7th, I went to one of those rallies against the judicial reform. Mostly because I thought it was like an interesting sociological experiment. Not that I felt strongly one way or the other about judicial reform. But I'm walking along, and everyone there, it's Tel Aviv. So Tel Aviv already has a left-leaning bent compared to the rest of the country. And everyone who goes to those rallies is against Bibi and against the judicial reform. So I was at a conference of Reform rabbis, and we wanted to go see, we wanted the experience. So we're there, we're walking along, there's thousands of people, it's very peaceful. There's no fighting, it's very peaceful. So we're just walking along, and people are looking at us, and they're speaking to us in Hebrew, and they're thanking us for coming. Thank you so much for being here, thank you so much. And I said, it's no problem. So, no problem, I don't mind, no problem, no problem. And then one guy said, oh, you're American. I said, yeah. He said, oh, forget it. Well, and it took me a second. He thought I was a religious nationalist because of the knit yarmulke who was like crossing the picket fence to join their side. But when he said, oh, yeah, Reform Rabbi from America, no wonder you guys are so far, you guys are left of us, But for a brief moment, he thought that we were right-wing religious national fanatics who had taken an anti-Bibi stance. And so everyone's like, thank you so much for coming. And I'm saying, hey, it's my pleasure. I don't mind. Yeah. You see the irony? Okay. So, all right. So, before 1967, there's no such thing as a settlement. No such thing. Before 1967. Why? Because the West Bank is part of Jordan. Jews aren't allowed there. The Gaza Strip is part of Egypt. Jews aren't allowed there. The Golan Heights is part of Syria. Jews aren't allowed there. So every Jew who lived in Israel proper. That's why we say the pre-67 lines. So up until 1967, there's no such thing as a settler. So you would never have a settler movement because there are no settlements. Clear so far? Okay. Comes the 6-Day War. Israel triples in size and now takes up all of this new land. Primarily the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. Also the Golan Heights, and eventually Jews will go up there, but it's pretty far removed from society, and unless you're a diehard farmer or a kibbutznik, you're probably not going to want to live up there. Plus, the Syrians are still on top shooting down at us, and it's a very dangerous place to be. But there are Jews now who say, well, wait a minute. This area that we've now just taken control of, called the West Bank, there's good news and bad news. The good news is all of this area that used to be Jordan is now Israel, and pretty much all of the book of Genesis happened right here. This is where it all happened. Kiryat Arba, Beth El, Shiloh, Hebron, all the cities that are mentioned in Genesis where we come from, where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah are buried. Rachel's buried somewhere else, but it's it's near Bethlehem. It's in the West Bank. They're buried there. This is our land. This is our history. That's the good news. The other good news is we now have more defensible borders. But the bad news is there are a million Arabs there. And they don't like us. Because they used to be controlled by Arabs, and now they're controlled by Jews, and that's unheard of to them. But Israel controls the area. So, for a variety of reasons, Jews say, we want to now go and settle this area, at which point we now have a new era of the Arab-Israeli conflict called settlements. So if anyone ever tells you settlements have been a problem since 1948, they say, that's not a thing. There's no such thing as settlers until after the 6-Day War. Now, Israel does, what also happens, not long after the 6-Day War, once you get into the 70s, for the first time in Israel's history, it elects a right-wing government. Up until this point, it was all labor. Ben-Gurion, Golda, Perez, Rabin, Eshkol, Sharet, every single one of them, labor. Comes early 70s, Menachem Begin wins. Menachem Begin is Likud, more right-wing. Who's in the Likud? Primarily Sephardic, primarily religious, primarily poorer. Those are types of people who say, if I want to go live in the West Bank, it's a lot cheaper. It's a lot cheaper. I could basically go buy a house there. I live in this 2-bedroom apartment with 19 kids right now in Jerusalem, and it's unaffordable. I could go 3 miles that way to Ma'ale Adumim or Gush Emunim or Kfar Etzion or something like that, where the government's building brand new houses, 4 or 5 bedrooms, that I can have for basically nothing. And I'm going to get tax breaks like you wouldn't believe. Because Likud wants to create settlements. Financially, it was enough of a boon to go. But religiously, I could also go and live where Abraham used to walk. Right? I could also go and live where I'm providing a security base against the Arabs who are trying to kill us. So there are 4 reasons why Jews wanted to settle. Okay? 1, economic. It's cheaper. 2, reclaiming historical biblical Israel. 3, better security. Right? And 4, this land was promised to me. I had an Orthodox guide once, and everywhere we went, he'd walk around. We were walking around Israel, and he'd walk around, this land is your land, this land is mine. But this is Jewish land. This is the land that the Torah says is promised to me. So for those 4 reasons, some Israelis started to go, and they started to build settlements. And at the time, who did Menachem Begin put in charge of building these settlements? Ariel Sharon, whose nickname was Hadachpur, the bulldozer, for a variety of reasons. Not to mention if you ever were in line behind him at a buffet. But he became the father of the settlements, and settlement expansion exploded in the 70s under Menachem Begin and Ariel Sharon.
But at what point was security no longer available to the settlements?
So now you have a new problem. They had to be secured by the army. Now, what did you also have in the mid-60s? The rise of Yasser Arafat and the PLO. So terrorism is nothing new, and Israel had to be very careful. So there was a huge Israeli military presence. But here's the problem. You're an Israeli computer scientist who lives in Tel Aviv. I don't know if they had computers. You're a podiatrist. They had toes, I know, back then. So you're a podiatrist in the 60s. You're a secular guy. Shabbos, you go to the beach. Your son now has to go to the West Bank during the week to protect radicals living in the settlements that you don't agree with. And maybe your son gets shot. And maybe he gets killed protecting people that you don't think have a right to be there anyway. And society, and the rest of Israelis start looking down on the settlers and saying, what do we need it for? On the other hand, there are plenty of Israelis that say, better you be the front lines than me. So here's the argument. If you go to a settlement today, have you ever been in a settlement, an Israeli settlement? Okay, have you ever been in the West Bank and go and talk to the people? I've done it many times. I have a lot of friends, all different parts of Israel. I used to have a good friend who was the mayor of Itamar, which is a very dangerous area. So first of all, any settlement that you're on in the West Bank, they're all on hills for security purposes. But any direction that you look, there's a Palestinian city. In any direction that you look, you're going to see somewhere, you can actually see it, a Palestinian city. The difference between the Israeli settlement and the Palestinian cities is Pinecrest and Coral Gables. They're literally right next to each other. And maybe they've cleared out a no man's land, but they're right next to each other. And that Palestinian city has Hamas operatives and jihadists. And they're sitting in tunnels every day thinking of ways to kill you. And every once in a while, one of them gets through and kills someone. All the time. Now, could 98% of those Palestinian people in that village be wonderful people? Could be. But 2% are Hamas people who are thinking every day, how do I kill you? There's never been a moment in any Palestinian village anywhere where there wasn't at least a few people thinking, how do we go kill those Jews? And every once in a while, they do. And so those settlers start to develop the mentality that everyone in that village is my enemy who wants to kill me. Is that true? No. Do a lot of them want to kill you? Yes. Do all of them think that you're on their stolen land? Most likely. And so it's very bitter and very contentious. And the ultra-Orthodox sitting in their nice neighborhoods in Jerusalem are saying, we don't really think you even need to be there. We understand that's God-given land, but you're putting yourself in danger that's not necessary. Come live here with us in Jerusalem, and when the Messiah comes, we'll get that land back. That was the position of Ovadia Yosef, who was one of the most famous chief rabbis in Israeli history. He died many years ago. His son then became chief rabbi, but he was the spiritual leader of the political party Shas. And how does Shas vote? Like the rabbi told them to vote. I don't know where, somewhere in Judaism that got lost. You know, the rabbi would say, here's who you vote for, and everyone would just, no complaining, no, but what about it? I send out an email, Betham, everyone needs to vote for so-and-so. People write back complaining. Somewhere, that's the difference between us and Shas. There are a few other differences. A little bit. Okay. Now, I have so much material, I don't know where to... okay. The ultra-Orthodox in Israel have to understand. You can't be blind to understand. When the Iranians come, when Hamas and Hezbollah shoot their rockets, they're not going to say, hey, you see this Haredi, this area? Don't fire the rockets at them because they don't join the army. They're not really our enemies. Leave them alone. That's not a thing. Don't they realize that the terrorists are coming for them too? Of course they do. What they're telling you is, you protect us, we study Torah, you pay for us, we study Torah, and you succeed because we're studying Torah. There's a joke in Israel that 1/3 of the population pays taxes, 1/3 of the population works, and 1/3 of the population goes to the army. The problem is it's the same third that does all three. Now, the truth is, before October 7th, Israel is a very powerful country. Israel has $1 trillion economy. You know, there's this big debate about getting aid from America. And Israel gets $3.8 billion a year in aid, which is almost entirely military. $3.8 billion isn't that much in $1 trillion economy. I mean, they could get that much a year just from Bloomberg. Or one of these other guys. Uh, it's not that it's that money. It's that when Israel's at war, it needs constant resupplying from America. It can't produce enough materials that it needs for a war this long. So one of the problems during this last war was airplane parts, fighter pilot parts. And so those needed to be continued to ship from America because there's certain things that, there's so many different things that go into making a military of the size of Israel that Israel doesn't have a country that large and factories that large that could produce all of that stuff. And the rest of the world sure as heck isn't going to sell it to Israel, except for Germany, but you can never count on them. It has to be America. And so that's why it's so important that America supports Israel when Israel's at war. But Israel never imagined that it would fight a war this long. So now that it realizes it's going to fight a war this long, the question is, can it afford to have 20 to 30% of its population doing nothing? So you might have said, all right, listen, you know, citizen in Tel Aviv, you're going to fight in the war, but you have a restaurant or a shoe store or a jewelry store, and you're going to have to close it because you're going to fight. I'm an Orthodox guy who studies Torah all day. I'll come work in your shop for a few months. I'll come clean, whatever I can do to help, I'll come help you. None of that. Zero. Wouldn't get up to lift a finger. The entire sector of society wouldn't get up to lift a finger to help the rest of them. And what they're really saying is, well, here are the myths. Let me tell you the myths, and then I'll tell you the truth. The myth is, why is it that they're so afraid, the ultra-Orthodox, to allow their kids to go to the army? And the basic argument has always been, because they won't come back. Why would they come back to this rigid, difficult style of living in poverty? And mostly when you're talking about soldiers, you're talking about men. You know what else they have over there? Bikinis. They never saw that before because they don't have TV. They only have certain newspapers. They never saw it before. They have women. They have non-kosher food. They have clubs that are open on Shabbat. And once they see that, they're not coming back. So we can't let them go. So that's problem number one. Problem number two. If they're not studying, myth number two maybe. If they're not studying Torah, who's going to make sure that God's watching over the real soldiers? So we have to be studying the Torah so that God will protect you. That's the Hine Matov model. Which, by the way, never would have stood up in King David's time. King David made everyone go fight. There was no such thing. You know what the book of Numbers is? The book of Numbers is about how many soldiers do you have. And every tribe had to send their soldiers. Who's the soldiers? Men ages 20 to 60. Not excluding the ones who studied Torah. When there's war, everybody goes. So I don't know that King David would have bought this. King David bought this in peacetime. You want us to study Torah for you and you bring us food? If you're interested in that deal, fine, you got it. But that's peacetime. That's not, to use that, I think it's not fair. King David was a warrior. He was in battles all the time. Almost every page of his life in the Tanakh, he's fighting someone. Okay. So what I think is, it's not, even though that's what people always argue, that they need to be studying Torah, that if they go there, they'll never come back. I heard a rabbi, last time I was in Israel, a great rabbi who was like one of my heroes, he told me something else. Now, pretty much all the ultra-Orthodox are not Zionists. They don't support the state. And the reason they don't, even though they live there and the state protects them and takes care of them, it's hypocritical and they don't support the state. Why? Because the Mashiach hasn't come, the Messiah hasn't come, and we don't have a right to build a state yet. So they don't even support the state. And if they did support the state, they wouldn't support the state because the state isn't theocratic, doesn't rule according to Torah. So, I heard a podcast recently. One of the lecturers from the Hartman Institute was saying something very interesting. He said, you know what happens if you ask an ultra-Orthodox person, what would happen if you, the ultra-Orthodox, were the majority in Israel and we all had to live according to you? What would you want? What would you do? And what's their automatic standard response? We'll never be the majority, so don't worry about it. Why do they do that? They don't want to be the majority. They can't be the majority. Because you know what happens when you are the majority? You have to take responsibility. Who's going to pay the bills? Who's going to work? Who's going to fight in the army? Who's going to protect us? Because they know that without an army, there's no Israel. Well, if they're the majority and the majority is not in the army, there's no Israel. So their standard response is, well, we'll never be the majority, so who cares? But the real answer is, we don't want to be the majority because we don't want to have to take responsibility for the rest of you. We don't even want to take responsibility for ourselves. That's how the rest of society looks at them and says, I'm paying for this. Could you imagine? So, the real answer, though, he said, was, this rabbi that I saw in Israel on my last trip said something very interesting. He said, it's not that they're afraid of assimilation. It's not that they're worried about Torah. He said, it's very simple. They don't see you as their brothers and sisters. You're not their family. And they're not going out to die for people who are not their family. They want it both ways. They want everyone to be Haredi, ultra-Orthodox, but if they were, they wouldn't know what to do. They wouldn't know how to run the country. So they really don't want it that way, but they do want it that way. And at the same time, if it's not going to be like that, then we don't want anything to do with you, but go take care of us and fight for us.
I read somewhere that an important part of this is their leadership, which is not mentioned. And the leadership obviously is very much afraid of their going out back, their ranks will diminish. And the leadership wants to have control. And I think there are probably some parallels between the ultra-Orthodox here and in America, especially in New York, where they have essentially tried to ignore minimal educational standards.
No doubt.
And it seems to me in Israel that which I presume has mandatory education, some requirements as to curriculum, that those are essentially waived, and you end up educating these people to the extent that girls are educated at all. It's a very, pumping, and they had a minimal.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm glad you brought this up because I looked at the research on this. And there are 3 myths about the Haredis and how the rest of Israelis view them. And you hit on one of the 3. But you hit on one of the 3 that's actually true. The other 2 are not, according to the research. So the first myth is that there is an exodus of the younger generation of Haredim from ultra-Orthodoxy and that they're leaving at a rate of 20%. That 20% continue to leave, that once they get older, leave that lifestyle. The research is that that's not true. That they're actually the most stable sector of the entire Israeli society. That's the research that I found. The other myth is that if Israeli Jews push them hard enough and make them serve in the army and make them go to work, and so they'll leave the country, which they've threatened to do. What country do they think wants hundreds of thousands of ultra-Orthodox Jews?
Who want to be supported? Iran.
The only thing they forgot is that people don't like Jews. Where do they think they... Name one country in the world that would take hundreds of thousands of Haredi Jews who refuse to work. Nobody, there's not one country in the world that would take them. So that myth is ridiculous. Oh, they'll come here. Yeah, Americans love immigration these days. We can't give us 300,000 Jews who promise not to work. Or lift a finger to help society in any way at all. Who wants that? And finally, the one myth that may be true that you hit on is that there is a gap in belief between the leaders and the younger generations. And that may be true. One of the things that you find is that the Haredi Jews living in America are becoming more and more Zionist. And they've always been brought up to believe that Israel's bad, that you're not supposed to go back until the Messiah comes, that the government's run by non-Orthodox Jews who don't keep Shabbat and all this stuff. But if you go and look at their phones, you see Jerusalem Post, you see Times of Israel, you see all they're reading is news about Israel, and that they care very deeply about the state of Israel and its security. And that's a new development in the Haredi world. Now, I didn't really, we're almost out of time, and I didn't say anything about the, I know it's hard to believe when you're having this much fun, but I didn't really say anything about the religious Zionists. So let me just spend a few minutes on them, and then we may need a part 2 of this class because I got a lot more material. Once 1967 passes and Israelis start moving to the settlements, they're a different type of Israeli. They're very radical in their beliefs. You'd have to be to want to go live there. Why would you want, unless you're going for pure financial reasons. Most of them went because that's holy land. The Arabs don't belong here. This is our historical birthright. And we want to protect the land. And so we're going. And we're going to, they had this real pioneer spirit of building new communities, starting with just, 20 families, 30 families. And even today, the settlements are small. They're only 20,000 people at most. Some of them are 1,000 people, 3,000 people. There are a few that have emerged on the suburbs of Jerusalem that are much larger, like Ma'ale Adumim and Efrat, and are really beautiful places. But technically, they're in the West Bank, even though they're outgrowths of Jerusalem. But most of the people who were going there in the 70s and the 80s and even the 90s were very pioneering, but for the most part, Orthodox. They're not all Orthodox, but for the most part, Orthodox and very Orthodox. And they started building new yeshivas. And if you listen to the names of the differences between the settler yeshivas and the ultra-Orthodox yeshivas, you'll tell something very different. I'll tell you a few names. Tell me if you notice the difference. So here's some of the most famous ultra-Orthodox names of yeshivas. Mir, Slobodka, Panovich. On the other hand, you have Har Etzion, Yeshivat HaKotel, Netzach Yisrael. You hear the difference? The ultra-Orthodox are European cities. They're all named after European cities, where they started. The Dati Le'umi, the religious Zionists, are all Hebrew. And they're named after places in the land of Israel. So the ultra-Orthodox are saying, we're bound to the tradition of our tradition that came from Lithuania, came from Latvia, came from Poland. And the new religious Zionists are saying, no. We go back even further. This is our land. This is where we come from. We're naming our yeshivas. Forget Europe. We're done with Europe. Netzach Yisrael. Yeshivat HaKotel, right? This is Hebrew, named after this, Yeshiva Chevron, right? That, we're naming after cities here. So they look different. They'll wear like jeans and a t-shirt. They'll have yarmulkes like this, or maybe bigger ones, but let's go, they usually have long hair. They look a little bit like hippies. And for a while they said, we don't want to be part of the army. This is not our thing. We're going to fight right here for our land. But what they realized was that the army was a problem for them. Because the army was who the Supreme Court sent every time they built a home that was illegal, or, anytime a president in the Oval Office called the prime minister and said, I need to make a headline, I need to tell you to cut some apartments from a settlement, go do something, and the prime minister of Israel is forced to do it, and they go and make an area illegal that 6 months ago they told them to go and build. The settlers started to hate the army. But they realized something. How do you have influence on the army? You go in the army. And they said, we changed our mind. We're going to enter the army. And what happened? Because they're so radical, because they're so zealous about the land, they became the best soldiers. And anyone will tell you that the religious Zionists are the most zealous, the most hardcore soldiers. And over the years of doing that, they've increased their presence and their influence in the army and in society, to the point now where they have their own political parties that get big numbers. And that's why people like Smotrich and Ben Gvir exist. Who do they represent? Smotrich and Ben Gvir, the settlers. And that's why they're nuts. Not that, the settlers aren't nuts. Naftali Bennett grew out of that. And Naftali Bennett was, at one point, he was like really far right. The name of his party was right, Yamina. Literally, the name of his party was right wing. And by the time he became prime minister, he got voted out because he was too left wing, because he was normal. But now you have Ben Gvir and Smotrich, who are so far to the right. Now, why did that happen? A big change happened. I'll probably have to end with this. There's so much more to talk about. But you have to understand why the settlers are so fiery and so angry. Because, really two reasons. One was the government of Israel told them, go build these settlements, and go build these settlements in Gaza. And then in 2005, the Israeli government came in and kicked all of them out of Gaza. And that told the ones in the West Bank, that could happen to us someday. If we don't have real representation in the government, maybe someday some prime minister will come and say, I'm making peace, you're out. And then what happened? 1995, early 90s up until 1995, Yitzhak Rabin and Shimon Peres said, that's exactly what we're doing. We're going to have the Oslo Accords, and you can either leave or you're going to be there under Palestinian rule, but this is all changing. And that's the only way to make peace. What happened? None of them left. Because Rabin was assassinated, Oslo became a total failure, and we got the intifadas. But you can see how they feel that they've been duped. That they were told by governments, go and live there, and then pulled out and used as a prop in all of these negotiations. I'll just give one last example. By the way, what happened? What's the goal of a settlement? To get bigger. Why is the goal of a settlement to get bigger? Because when you grew up there and you liked it, you want to move back. Well, now these settlements are getting to their second and third generation. So what happens is, you had a settlement on a small piece of land that had maybe 1,000 apartments. Okay, so you've been there for 20 years. And now the next generation wants to come back and live where they grew up. So they need to build new apartments. But every time you build even one apartment, the Palestinians go crazy, and the whole world goes crazy, and so forth. So I'll just give you one last story. There was a settlement called Ramat Shlomo. Now, Ramat Shlomo, up until it was built, was just a forest on the outskirts of Jerusalem. I've been there. It was nothing but a forest. But it was surrounded by Jewish settlements on all sides. Except that on one side's a cliff and there's nothing. You don't want to live there. But all around it were Jewish settlements. And one time when Biden was vice president, he was in Israel, and Israel announced it's going to allow more apartments to be built in Ramat Shlomo. Now, did Bibi do that just to annoy Obama? Most likely. Biden went crazy in his press conference before he left Israel and yelled at Bibi. Okay. But in that area where Ramat Shlomo was, before the Jews built that neighborhood, there was nothing there. No Palestinian in human history ever lived there. There was nothing there, and it's literally right next to an ultra-Orthodox area of Jerusalem where no one would live but Jews. So they had some extra land. They wanted to build some more apartments for more people to live right there where no Palestinian would ever live. And Biden went crazy. Why? Because Ramat Shlomo, if this is Jerusalem, and this is main part of Jerusalem, Israel, and here's the line to the West Bank, the apartments were right here. But from here to here, nobody lived. And so the settlements, because more people want to live there, first of all, they're cheaper now. So it used to be, if you went to a settlement in the 70s and you wanted to go live there, you have to be some crazy pioneer because you don't even have a supermarket. But now you go there, there's 100,000 people living there. So you have everything. You have restaurants, you have schools, you have a beautiful neighborhood. And it's a lot cheaper than Jerusalem, which is just 2 miles that way. So it's a nice place to live. But any time anyone in that section does anything, it makes international headlines. And it makes no sense. It makes no sense. So that's kind of what there's a lot more to the story, but hopefully this gives you a little bit of an insight into some of the issues that they're dealing with in Israel, and how orthodoxy plays a major role. But if you don't understand these types of issues, when you go to see the next election in Israel and who's voting for which of the different types of parties and what they're voting for, you have no chance of understanding what's really going on and how different politicians make coalitions. So I'll end with that, but if anyone has any questions, I'd be very happy to answer. So, yes?
Where do some of the Mizrahi Jews that are Orthodox, where do they kind of fit in?
They're almost all Likud. The Mizrahi movement is almost entirely Likud. But there is one ultra-Orthodox party that is Shas. And they would follow Shas, which is this guy Aryeh Deri, who's the head of the party. He's been in jail 7 times for a whole variety of corruption charges. But he somehow seems to be... I'll tell you, there's a great book by Ari Shavit called My Promised Land. It's an old book, and Ari Shavit had some Me Too problems, so if that bothers you, don't read the book. But he wrote this great book. He's also kind of a left-wing guy. He's not my cup of tea, but his book is fantastic because what he does is he goes through every different tribe that's part of Israeli society and talks about them. And he has a great chapter on how Shas came to be because ultra-Orthodox Sephardim wanted representation. And this guy, Aryeh Deri, came to the rescue. It's a fabulous book. It's a must-read. My Promised Land. Shavit. Shavit. But he does have a Me Too issue, so you have to be careful.
What about the
Ethiopians,
Ethiopians?
frankly, I don't know who they vote for. There aren't many of them to make much of a difference, but I don't know. Yeah, I honestly, it's a good question. I don't know the answer. I'll have to look into it.
Another problem is fractured families. For example, in my family, my generation is first generation, and they
Oh, no doubt. No doubt. Yeah. You know, I mean, the ultra-Orthodox and the National Zionists tend to keep their group together, but there's all kinds of separations. I'll just tell you one quick thing. I knew this guy Menachem Bambach. He's an amazing rabbi in Israel. He's ultra-Orthodox. He's Haredi. The whole thing. Young guy. Grew up speaking it. Didn't even speak Hebrew till he was 13, because they only spoke Yiddish in his. Now he speaks beautiful Hebrew and English. He opened up a school to teach ultra-Orthodox kids a trade, like a trade school for ultra-Orthodox. Because he did that, his own family excommunicated him and will no longer speak to him. That's how intense it is.
Yeah,
He's-
I just wanted to state that not all, we visited the city of Ariel in the west,
Oh yeah, that's a big one.
which is a big,
It's basically the capital of Samaria.
a humongous university and performing arts center. It was built on a hilltop.
Oh yeah,
Where nobody lived. It was
right.
on the island rule. It was called Bedland. You couldn't even graze sheep there. But not all the people are religious Zionists. I would say almost half the population of Ariel is
Yeah.
secular, with a lot of Russian immigrants
Yeah.
mixed in there.
And they're probably there for economic reasons.
And they also, another thing, they also have a symbiotic relationship with the surrounding Palestinian villages, because in the industrial parks adjacent to the city, they employ thousands of Palestinians who love working there because they're getting the same wage, legal wage, as Israel proper.
No doubt.
Which is more than, they
Look.
would have earned otherwise.
100%. It's a very good point. The settlements. Now, are there some settlements where there's like 500 families or 1,000 families that are all hardcore religious Zionists? Of course. Are there others that are really just like main cities of Israel now that are in the West Bank and are technically settlements but have all kinds of people? Sure. Efrat. Efrat is a major outgrowth of Jerusalem. It's almost entirely modern Orthodox, but you have all kinds of people living there because it's cheaper. Some of them are there just because they like the culture. They say, look, I have the small town feel. You know, it's a little quieter, it's a lot cheaper, but it's only 5 miles to Jerusalem or 5 miles to Tel Aviv or wherever it's located. But you also have a diversity of opinions on the Palestinians. You have some settlers who say, all Palestinians want to kill you and they're all evil. And you have others who say, I play soccer with them 4 times a week. They're some of my best friends. You get both opinions. Okay.
I read somewhere that on average, 10% of Orthodox young people leave the Orthodox lifestyle and families, but on the other hand, 10% of secular would move into. So it's kind of a wash.
It's a wash. Okay. Yeah. So from what I heard, the research is that the numbers aren't nearly as big as people think of people leaving the Haredi world. To leave the Haredi world, it's very hard because you're basically cut off from your family. Your family thinks like you're dead. And anyone you ever knew in your whole life, you're dead to them. It's very, very hard. It's very tough. Okay, thank you all so much. I appreciate you coming.